Thank you, Laurie. So, when I found out there was lightning talks, and I thought, what could I speak about? I thought there was something really interesting going on with PowerShell, specifically PowerShell 5 and Windows 10 as well, but PowerShell has become so much bigger than that. So I jumped at the opportunity to volunteer and to become one of the lightning talk speakers. It also gave me a chance to try out my new laser pointer here, so that was important. But I could not pick a topic that is harder or less sexy to talk about, because really it looks like a command prompt. So what I'm trying to do is, in this talk, is explain what is PowerShell, why is it important, and give you some demos in Windows 10. Now, I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions during this talk. I'm just going to ask you one question. Has anyone heard of PowerShell? All right. Okay, good. Who uses PowerShell to change the way they work or do things? Okay. All right. So I asked two questions. Okay. So that'll be the end of it there. So I've heard of PowerShell for a long time, actually. It's been around since 2005, and variations of that in different forms from Microsoft have been bouncing around. It still exists, whether it's a BB script, batch files from the command prompt. There's a lot of different solutions out there. But make no mistake, by the end of this talk, if you realize that PowerShell is the solution, not only for what Microsoft uses internally, but what they expect us to use as well for their technologies, I'll accomplish what I want to do, which is have you look at PowerShell a little bit more seriously and see what it could do for yourself, whether it's on your local laptop or things that you work with across an enterprise with various data centers located across the world, or maybe push things up to Azure. So you'll see that the scale is truly unlimited as far as what PowerShell can do. So what is PowerShell? Well, it's an object-oriented scripting language. There's a lot of scripting languages out there. It looks a lot like the command prompt, which is unfortunate. In the most recent versions, they've gone from a black background with white lettering to a blue background with white lettering. So that's the big change, but it still looks like a command prompt. They have an interactive editor that looks very primitive compared to what you may see with, say, Visual Studio. But the real power of it is, as a version, PowerShell version 5, which came out with Windows 10, there are 3,000 commandlets, and commandlets are just a way of saying there's 3,000 built-in commands in PowerShell. But it has full access to the .NET framework. It has access to COM, WMI, basically anything that's out there available from Microsoft as an API or accessible technology to interface with any of their technologies is available through PowerShell. It has power, of course. It can function locally, but also remotely. Now, when I say remotely, I'm not talking only about a server in your data center, but we're talking about a server anywhere in the world that you have access to, and that includes Azure. Okay. It's also, if that isn't enough power for what you need to do, it's also extensible. So you could activate your own PowerShell modules. You could extend it through programs built in Visual Studio. Now, as far as to give you an idea how important this, PowerShell is part of what's called the Microsoft Common Engineering Criteria. What that means is that if any division of Microsoft is producing anything to go out, whether it's consumer side or internally, it has to have a PowerShell functionality, fully accessible to it. So that is far more reaching than anything that would have a specification from a UI perspective. So as long as your program, let's say it's SQL Server, Exchange Server, has full accessibility by PowerShell, you met that Microsoft Common Engineering criteria. The UI no longer has to provide that full level of functionality. Okay, and you'll see why shortly. So, as I mentioned before, it doesn't look very exciting. What you see there, right here, is a Windows PowerShell running, and a command was typed in called get service, and you see a list of services that are available on that computer. This is the PowerShell logo. I know it's exciting, but as you can see, what throws a lot of people off, and what's thrown me off for a very long time, is that it doesn't look that exciting. What you start to see, what can be done with it, is truly amazing. If you're not worried about clicking through a user interface, or you're not concerned about making mistakes, or having someone take over that task for you and having to explain them through instructions what to do through a user interface, if you're looking for some way to automate that process, PowerShell provides that. Now, PowerShell, as is mentioned here, is a task automation and configuration management framework for Microsoft, and a command line shell and sort of scripting. So that's basically, you always see that kind of framing of what PowerShell is, but I'm going to walk you through how it's being used, and I'm going to use Microsoft as a few of those examples. Okay. That integrated scripting environment that I talked about before, you have 3 different sections here. One is where you actually type in command and run them as an interactive script. You can type them into the actual prompt itself for PowerShell and type them in here, or see the interactions from typing here or down there. And you have a list of the commandlets here. So it's a very simple integrated scripting environment. Nothing compared to what most people are familiar with the modern tools out there, such as Visual Studio. As of April 2015, you now have the full access to Visual Studio and use it to extend, work, debug PowerShell scripts. Okay. So this is just one example how important PowerShell is to Microsoft. And what they're saying is we want people to use it, and they want it to be more accessible. They realize people are not that excited or that familiar anymore with the command prompt and how to work with it in the environment. They expect a much more richer user interface. As of this month, actually about a week ago, they released PowerShell language support for Visual Studio Code. Now, I like Visual Studio Code. Actually, I've started using it a lot more than Visual Studio, just because it's very light, it's very powerful. You can use it on Windows, Linux, Mac, and they now provide full language support for PowerShell, including telesense, code navigation, real-time script analysis, and local script debugging. So you can do a lot, and it's become a lot more accessible. So one of the examples I gave a little while ago was why PowerShell is so important to Microsoft and what it's being used for. And what I'm hoping is that you can start to see how can you use it, whether it's for your local tasks on your computer that you do day to day, or how could you automate things that you do for your company or your business. One of the things that happened a while ago, actually in 2007, when Exchange Server was released that year, the whole UI that Exchange Server provides for administration runs through PowerShell commandlets. So in other words, PowerShell commandlets are the interface for full Exchange Server management. The UI simply sits on top of that. Okay, now if you've ever worked with Exchange Server and you know how a monstrosity it is, you can see how serious Microsoft is about being able to automate all that functionality. The result is that whenever now you work, and Microsoft manages, I believe, something like thousands of Exchange servers in their Azure cloud, as well as Office 365. All the wonderful graphical UI you see is nothing more than a front end to PowerShell scripts and commands that are running in the background. Now, one of the things about the UI is UIs, even though they're very interactive, they're not scriptable, they don't lend themselves to automation. They're error prone. And if you go any level of deep through the UI, you realize how cumbersome and slow it is when you have to manage it on an ongoing basis. So when you have anything more than a trivial set of servers to manage, you need some way to automate it. So when you talk to any of the Microsoft engineers that give these presentations, and they'll show you the nice user interface for Azure or anything else, Exchange Online, Office 365, if you ask them what they actually work with on the back end, you'll see that it'll come back as PowerShell scripts. Okay. Now, this is an example, actually. This is an example of one of the talks. I may have seen this many times myself before too, but I didn't really pay much attention to those little symbols that they show in here, and they don't really talk very much about it because it's not very exciting to describe these large, maybe multi-thousand line scripts that they use to manage and run their systems and to automate to a high degree. One thing you have with scripts that you can't do with a user interface is that you could put out a version control, you could re-execute it multiple times in a test environment and then apply it to, let's say, a data center in one location and then its corresponding geolocation partner, apply it there again. And you can do it at a level of consistency that you just cannot reproduce in any type of manual process. So again, talking about the scale of it, and one of the, actually at the Cloud Roadshow, I was speaking to one of the people who manages part of this network here, part of the IT operations, and he said he runs and builds script with his team that manage thousands of servers across the Microsoft data center infrastructure, and they do it through PowerShell. And he said he hasn't come across yet an instance where it could not scale up or cross to solve any kind of problem that we've encountered. So what makes PowerShell very special is that not that it provides automation, it does that very well. But what it also does is it has access to pretty much any type of technology available that has an interface to it, or it can be extended to do so. And so we're talking about anything with SQL Server, Hyper-V, IS, so any type of interface that's available, by whatever means available, especially .NET, which is very accessible, you have access through PowerShell that can be scripted and automated. So again, to give you an idea how important this is, and actually this was an interesting part of the story, depending on how much time I have here. Ken, how am I doing?
Yep, you go 9 minutes.
Okay, so Jeffrey Snover is now, as of September, a Microsoft Technical Fellow. From a Microsoft technical hierarchy, that is the highest technical title that they have. That's not the same as a business title, like say Chief Technology Officer, but from a technical title point of view, the top of the chain is Microsoft Technical Fellow. And he was awarded that in September for all his work and contributions to PowerShell that has been used throughout Microsoft extensively. And one of the things that's interesting about that is he's now in charge of Microsoft DevOps as well as Windows Server 2016. Now, when I go from there to this, what you have is PowerShell is a key part of Windows 10, Windows Server 2016, and Nano Server, which you may not have heard of, maybe you have, but Windows 10 is the consumer version, Windows Server 2016, which is coming out next year. Now, what's interesting is that these two operating systems are designed to be fully automated and run through PowerShell, to the point where a lot of things you can maintain or even do, or like certain software removal, can only be done through PowerShell. So now we've gotten to the opposite end now, where PowerShell can actually take care of all the functionality that we're used to seeing through the user interface, plus it's gone further where there's no longer a user interface for some of the functionality. So with Windows Server 2016, that's brought really, really closer to home, where everything is now fully accessible through PowerShell. Windows Server 2016 is meant to be fully managed through PowerShell. The Nano Server, which is interesting, which is what's called a headless version of a very stripped down version of Windows Server 2016, has no user interface. There is none. There's no option to turn it on. There's no option as an add-in. It has no interface. The only way to interact with that server is PowerShell. Okay, so that gives you an idea how big and encompassing this is, both from a scale point of view and from Microsoft's point of view. And what I'm trying to bring home is that if you understand PowerShell, you have access to technology not only at your local computer, but also to levels above that, whether it's through additional servers or your data center, or working with Azure or any of these technologies, managing Exchange Server, SQL Server, or hundreds of SQL servers. PowerShell is the tool and that's being designed and being brought forward by Microsoft to do so. So I'm going to walk through a few quick demos here, because even though people have heard about PowerShell, I've heard about PowerShell for a very long time. I've actually never taken this seriously until about 6 months ago. And what we're doing right now is we're taking sort of a mishmash collection of manual processes that are done in the local computer, things like local builds, rolling back SQL Server database, relaunching a Hyper-V back from an image, and automating that through PowerShell, where you can now just do a run-on-one script and it'll do all of that automatically for you. The benefit of that is that you can now share this with your team members too. So you don't have to try to teach them how to do it, you don't have to have some sort of document to do it. You can give them the script. If the environment is similar enough where you can set it with some additional variables if you need to control that, you can now reproduce that best practice across the team. You can then also take that and then push it out to your build servers. And that's what we're in the midst of doing, and that's why I find it so exciting to talk about something that looks like a command prompt with some simple text-based commands. So, how am I doing?
5.5 minutes.
Okay, so the demo part, So the first thing I'm going to show you is where to find PowerShell. It may not be obvious. It's been there since Windows XP. It's been around a long time, but you'll see there's a few subtle differences here. So the first thing is if you go and find it, and you go through all apps on your Windows 10 machine, and you scroll down, you will find, as you go through this here, under W you'll find Windows PowerShell, and you'll find that there are 4 of them. One is the PowerShell and the PowerShell ISC. That's the 64-bit versions. You'll also find x86 and the x86 ISC, which is the 32-bit versions. You can also find it if you go through File Manager here, and you're on any type of directory there. If you go to File, you will see Open Command Prompt, but you also see Open Windows PowerShell. Okay. The other area that you'll see and the ability to do that, which is interesting as part of Windows 10, is if you go to Properties in the Task Manager and you go to Navigation, you now have the option to replace the command prompt with Windows PowerShell. So what they're looking to do is remove all that legacy that's built up and replace it with PowerShell. Okay, so this is not to be a not so subtle hint of where the future is going. And this is the premier and eventually the only tool available to them as far as a support point of view to manage operating systems to go forward. Actually, there is one other way to do it as well. If you go into the command prompt, within the command prompt, if you type in PowerShell, you will actually go from the DOS command, command prompt to PowerShell. There is no DOS shell anymore.
There's a DDoS.
So what does it look like when you're working with it? Well, again, like I said, it's not very exciting, even though it's extremely important. I find it exciting. But if you open up the Windows PowerShell ISC, and I'm running it in 2 panes here. One is the interactive prompt. So PowerShell can actually work like a very rich environment. If you ever work with SQL Server and SQL Server Manual Studio, you can do a select command on a table and you get instant results. Well, imagine and sometimes you may string a whole set of commands together and you can create a script of it, you can save the script and then you get executed over and over again. Well, the same thing applies with PowerShell. So for example here, right now I'm in PowerShell. You can tell that because it says PS on the left-hand side. It's a blue background with white lettering. You can customize that all extensively as well, the colors and layout. But it also accepts normal commands that you use from the command prompt. So you could change the directory to C:. You could do a dir, a directory on it. You could do a clear screen on it. So in many ways, it already acts like a command prompt, which is amusing and interesting, but that sort of hides really what it does. Let's just do a clear host here, which is the real command that's running. If you run a command called $PS version table, by the way, this is simply a script that I'm running through here. You could type it in on the left-hand side, but you could also set the commands here as part of a script and execute it directly from this side here. So instead of watching me type it in, I could simply select this command, PS version table, execute it. And it'll show me the current version of PowerShell that I'm running, which is version 5. You'll find that, just to wrap up this demo here, PowerShell is meant to be self-exploring. You can use things like get command, and it will list all the commands that are built in right now available to you. You could do get help on get command, and it will give you a help on that command itself. So you could actually start to explore all the features and power of PowerShell in an interactive manner by simply using get command, get help, and then exploring it further and further from there. So for example, if I wanted to do something like get command, let me know what kind of commandlets are available called service, and I run that, you'll see that I have functions as well as services here, and one of them is called get service. This is me pointing to there. So if I then go and say get service, just run it by itself, I have a list of all the services running on this machine here. I could then do something like get service spooler, and I can see that my print spooler is running. I could say stop
service spooler. And if I were to check the status of it again, it stopped, and I could restart it again as well. Okay. Now, if you look at the commands down here, you can start linking these commands, and soon you can have a script hundreds of commands long. And what you'll find is that, like the example I've just highlighted below, you can actually use something like this to remove the Zune video package that you can't uninstall any other way from your Windows 10 machine. And you can find hundreds of scripts out there that will remove just about one or everything you could possibly think of, and you just link them together and run it, and you can remove it all completely. And that gives an example of very simple local Windows 10 usage, but imagine extrapolating it for thousands of Windows 10 machines you have to manage. And that's it. Thank you.